Dr. Marcus Levitz. He is a brilliant but reclusive neuroscientist, driven by an obsession to unravel the deepest secrets of the human mind. For years, Marcus has been on the brink of a scientific breakthrough, working tirelessly in his isolated laboratory, surrounded by endless gray skies and towering trees that seem to close in on the building like an unyielding fortress. His creation, the Dream Machine, is meant to revolutionize the world. It has the power to project dreams onto a screen for anyone to witness, an achievement that could change the way humanity understands consciousness itself. But the setting holds a darker tone. The laboratory, located in an abandoned psychiatric hospital on the outskirts of the city, is filled with echoes of the past, shadows moving in the corner of one's eyes, and unsettling creaks in the dead of night. These strange occurrences never bothered Marcus until now. Little does he know, the line between dreams and reality is about to blur in ways more horrifying than he could ever imagine. As Marcus prepares to activate the machine for the first time, a chilling gust of wind rattles the lab's old, cracked windows. For a brief moment, he swears he hears something, someone, whispering his name in the shadows. He dismisses it as nerves. After all, he's about to cross the threshold into uncharted territory. His fingers tremble slightly as he straps the electrodes to his temples, the cold metal sending shivers down his spine. The lab, usually a sterile environment of machines and monitors, feels unnervingly claustrophobic tonight. The air itself seems thicker, heavier, as if the walls are watching him, waiting for something. His eyes flicker toward the monitor, where his dreams will be displayed. For the first time in his life, Marcus feels fear creeping into his chest, a fear that has nothing to do with the science, but everything to do with the unknown. What will he see? More importantly, what will see him? Have you ever wondered what truly lurks in your dreams? What if the things you see when you sleep aren't just figments of your imagination, but doorways to something darker, something alive? Dr. Marcus Levitz is about to discover that some dreams are better left unseen. As a neuroscientist driven by curiosity, Marcus created the Dream Machine, a device capable of projecting dreams onto a screen. But tonight, something is different. Tonight, the machine feels like a gateway, not just to his subconscious, but to something far more sinister. Marcus sits in the dimly lit lab, the eerie hum of the machine filling the silence. He's alone, or so he thinks. With the electrodes connected, he glances around the room, feeling an inexplicable unease. His heartbeat quickens, and a cold sweat forms on his brow as the machine begins to whir. The screen flickers, and for a moment, the lab is bathed in a soft, otherworldly glow. On the screen, shapes begin to form, vague at first, then clearer, like shadows coalescing into something tangible. But as Marcus watches, the shapes seem to ripple and distort, as if something on the other side is aware it's being observed. His breath catches. There, in the far corner of the screen, a figure stands, a figure that wasn't part of his dream. Panic claws at his chest, but he forces himself to focus. "It's just my mind," he whispers, though deep down, he knows he's wrong. As the dream continues to play out on the screen, Marcus realizes with growing dread that this is not just a projection of his subconscious. Something is watching him back. Before the terror fully sets in, Marcus jolts out of his trance. His eyes dart to the screen, but the figure is gone. The lab feels darker, colder, as if a presence lingers just out of sight. The machine powers down with a low whine, leaving only the deafening silence behind. Marcus forces a shaky laugh, trying to brush off the experience. "It's nothing," he mutters. But the sense of being watched remains, crawling under his skin. His hand hovers over the machine's switch, unsure whether to shut it off completely or start again. His rational mind tells him it's just a glitch, a strange, scientific anomaly. Yet the terror that grips his heart tells a different story. If you're curious about what happens next and what else Marcus will uncover, make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave a like. Trust me, this is just the beginning, and you don't want to miss what's coming next. The moment Marcus reactivates the Dream Machine and closes his eyes, he's immediately transported into a familiar setting, a street from his childhood, lined with the tall oak trees he used to climb. The air feels thick with humidity. The smell of damp earth and freshly cut grass fills his nostrils. At first, everything feels oddly serene, like an old memory replaying in perfect detail. But there's a strange tension hanging in the air, something almost imperceptible but undeniable. The wind that usually whispered through the trees is silent. The birds, once lively and chirping, are nowhere to be heard. The world seems too still, too quiet, as if holding its breath. It's then that Marcus notices it. Everything is exactly the same, yet wrong. The trees, the street, the houses, all in place, but slightly distorted, like looking through cracked glass. The further Marcus walks down the street, the more his surroundings seem to shift. The colors begin to fade, the sky darkens unnaturally fast, and the once vibrant green of the grass takes on a sickly, decayed hue. His footsteps echo unnervingly loud, even though he's on a soft dirt path. And then there's the smell. What once was the scent of fresh earth turns to something rotting, something sour, metallic, like blood. His stomach churns as the atmosphere presses in on him, the sense of familiarity unraveling. His childhood home appears ahead, but the windows are black and no light escapes from within. An overwhelming dread grips him, tightening around his chest like a vice. The dream feels alive, shifting and bending as if it's aware of Marcus, as if it's watching him. His skin prickles as he hears a faint sound behind him, a soft whisper, unintelligible but unmistakably real. He turns sharply, expecting to see someone standing there, but there's nothing but empty street. The whisper grows louder, the words still elusive but taunting. His heart races, every instinct screaming for him to run, yet his feet feel rooted to the ground. Suddenly, the wind picks up, but it carries a voice with it now, faint but clear. You're not supposed to be here. The realization hits him like a cold wave. This isn't just a dream. Something is manipulating it, warping it, making it hostile. Marcus tries to wake himself, pinching his arm, slapping his face, but nothing works. The dream has taken control, and he is no longer its creator. He is its prisoner. His breathing becomes shallow, panic rising as the world around him distorts further, twisting and pulsating with malevolence. In the corner of his vision, he sees movement, a shadow darting between the trees. It's fast, too fast, and it's getting closer. He doesn't know what it is, but every instinct tells him it's dangerous. And then, he hears it, a single, whispered word, right next to his ear. Run. The terror is palpable as Marcus bolts towards his childhood home. But with each step, the house seems to stretch further away, the street elongating, mocking his every effort to escape. His legs feel heavy, the ground beneath him feels like quicksand, pulling him down, slowing his escape. The whispering continues, growing louder and more frantic, surrounding him from all sides. He can feel the presence closing in, just behind him, its breath cold on the back of his neck. Desperation fuels him as he throws open the door of the house and slams it shut behind him. But the moment he's inside, he knows something is horribly wrong. The house is empty, barren, as if abandoned for decades. Dust hangs in the air, and the oppressive silence is deafening. Yet Marcus knows he's not alone. As he backs away from the door, a creaking sound echoes from the upstairs floorboards. His heart pounds in his chest as he glances towards a staircase, shrouded in shadow. Something is up there, waiting for him, and it's calling his name. As Marcus stands frozen at the foot of the stairs, the creaking from above grows louder, heavier, as if something impossibly large is moving slowly toward him. His breath catches in his throat as the air in the house turns cold, unnaturally cold, sending chills down his spine. Every instinct screams at him to flee, but his body feels paralyzed, rooted in place by an overwhelming sense of dread. The shadows at the top of the stairs begin to shift, undulating like liquid darkness. Slowly, a figure emerges, a silhouette, humanoid but wrong, its limbs too long, its movements jerky and unnatural, as though it's not used to moving in this world. The figure pauses at the top step, staring down at him. Marcus can't see its face, but he can feel its eyes boring into him, cold and relentless. His skin prickles with terror as the figure begins to descend the stairs, each step slow and deliberate, as if savoring the moment. The walls of the house seem to close in, warping and twisting as the thing approaches. Marcus can hear his heart pounding in his ears, his pulse quickening with every step the figure takes. It's closer now, just a few feet away, its breath raspy, uneven, like it's struggling to breathe in this world. Suddenly, Marcus is overwhelmed by a nauseating stench, rotting flesh, decay, and something metallic, like blood mixed with rust. His stomach churns, and he has to fight the urge to vomit. The figure stops just a step away, and for a moment, everything goes silent. The house, the air, even Marcus's heartbeat seems to stop. The figure slowly raises its head, revealing a face, blank, featureless, a smooth expanse of skin where eyes, nose, and mouth should be. But then, without warning, a mouth rips open across the face, jagged and unnatural, like a tear in reality itself, and from it comes a guttural, inhuman scream that reverberates through the walls. Marcus stumbles back, tripping over his own feet as the scream echoes in his mind, a sound that feels like it's ripping through the fabric of his soul. The figure lunges at him, its elongated fingers reaching out. But just as it's about to grab him, Marcus feels a sudden pull, a violent jerk that throws him out of the nightmare and back into the cold reality of his lab. He gasps for air, drenched in sweat, his heart racing. He's back. The lab is quiet again, the machine humming softly, as if nothing had happened. But something is wrong. Marcus glances around the room, and a cold sense of dread washes over him. The lab looks different, subtle, almost imperceptible changes. His desk slightly out of place, the color of the walls just a shade darker, and the shadows in the corners seem deeper, more alive. He tries to shake off the feeling, but it lingers, like an itch he can't scratch. His eyes flicker to the monitor, where the dream had been projected. It's blank now, just static, but for a split second, Marcus swears he sees the silhouette of the figure from his dream standing in the static, watching him. Panicking, Marcus yanks the electrodes from his head and stumbles away from the machine, but the cold realization dawns on him. He's not entirely awake. Something from the dream, something dark and twisted, has followed him back into the waking world. The boundaries between his nightmare and reality are no longer clear, and Marcus knows, with a growing sense of terror, that the figure isn't gone. It's here, with him, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Marcus is gripped by an overwhelming sense of dread. The realization that something has followed him out of his dream gnaws at his mind. He paces around the lab, trying to calm himself, but every shadow seems to stretch unnaturally, and every flicker of light feels threatening. His breathing is shallow, each inhale sharp with anxiety. The machine, now silent, looms in the center of the room like a sinister figure itself, humming faintly as if mocking his fear. With shaky hands, Marcus pulls up the data logs from the previous session, trying to rationalize what just happened. But no error, no glitch, nothing on the screen explains the horror he had just witnessed. Desperation gnaws at him, and his scientific mind battles with the rising terror. "It's just my mind playing tricks," he mutters to himself over and over, trying to convince himself that the figure wasn't real, that it couldn't have followed him into reality. But then, something happens. A sudden, cold gust of wind sweeps through the room, though the windows are all sealed shut. The lights flicker, and Marcus's heart pounds in his chest. The room feels suffocatingly small, and in that moment, he hears it, a faint, raspy breathing that is not his own. He freezes. The sound is coming from behind him. His hands tremble as he slowly turns, dreading what he knows is already there. Standing in the corner, half shrouded in shadow, is the figure. It's no longer bound to the dream world. It's here, in the waking world, watching him with empty, unseen eyes. The featureless face twists, the grotesque mouth tearing open once more, but this time, there's no scream, just a whisper, soft and cold as death. You can't escape. Marcus's legs buckle beneath him, and he stumbles backward, knocking over a chair as he scrambles to put distance between himself and the thing. But no matter how far he moves, it doesn't follow. It simply stands there, unmoving, waiting. Marcus's mind races. He had read stories, accounts of people who had experienced something similar. Dreams bleeding into reality, entities that shouldn't exist stepping through the veil. But they were just stories, right? Legends of sleep paralysis and shadow people. None of it was supposed to be real. Yet here it was, staring him down, threatening to drag him back into the nightmare. Summoning all his courage, Marcus decides he has to confront it. He has to know what it wants. His voice shakes as he speaks, barely a whisper. "What are you?" he asks, though part of him doesn't want to know the answer. The figure shifts slightly, and for the first time, it steps out of the corner, its form more solid now, more real. The air around it ripples with an unnatural cold. As it moves closer, Marcus notices something horrifying. Its body isn't just an extension of the dream. It's made of the darkness itself. Tendrils of shadow coiling and uncoiling like living things. "I am the dream," it whispers, its voice slithering through the room like smoke. "And I am the nightmare. You open the door, and now I walk through it." Suddenly, Marcus feels a sharp, icy pain in his chest. He looks down in horror to see that his hand, the hand closest to the figure, is beginning to fade, the edges of his skin dissolving into a mist, like he's being pulled back into the dream. The realization crashes over him. This isn't just a dream bleeding into reality. He is being pulled into the dream itself, piece by piece. The figure's grotesque mouth curls into what might be a smile, but it's a hideous, unnatural expression, as though it's mimicking a human face without truly understanding it. Marcus stumbles back, his mind racing. The only way to stop this is to destroy the dream machine. It's the bridge, the portal that's allowed this thing into his world. But every second he hesitates, more of him fades into the mist, the dream claiming him inch by inch. With a surge of adrenaline, Marcus throws himself toward the machine, his fingers frantically grasping for the power switch. His vision blurs as the figure draws closer, its tendrils reaching for him, pulling at the edges of his reality. Just as its cold touch brushes his skin, Marcus slams his fist down on the switch, powering off the machine with a violent, deafening click. The room is plunged into darkness, and for a moment, all is still. The figure is gone. The dream, it seems, has receded. Marcus collapses onto the floor, gasping for air, drenched in sweat. He looks down at his hand. It's solid again, real. He's back. He's safe. Or so he thinks. As the darkness of the lab envelopes him, Marcus hears a faint, familiar whisper, carried on the still air. "I'll be waiting. When you dream again." In the days following his encounter with the figure, Marcus becomes a man consumed by paranoia and dread. His once brilliant mind, sharp and analytical, is now clouded with fear. Every waking moment feels like he's still trapped in the dream, as if the boundary between the two worlds has been permanently fractured. The dream machine remains switched off, gathering dust in the corner of his lab, but the sense of being watched has not disappeared. Shadows in the corners of his vision seem to move when he's not looking directly at them. Whispers echo through the empty halls of the abandoned psychiatric hospital where his lab resides. It's subtle, but it's there, a presence that never left. Marcus throws himself into research, desperate to find any logical explanation for what is happening. He scours old medical journals, occult literature, even discredited paranormal studies, but nothing fits. The figure that stalked his dreams and invaded his reality is unlike anything ever recorded. Every path he explores only deepens his fear that what he's dealing with isn't a glitch, nor a figment of his imagination. It's something much older, something far more dangerous. During one late night of frantic searching, Marcus stumbles upon an old experiment from the 1960s conducted in a Soviet lab. The study was never fully published, but whispers of its existence had circulated in certain scientific circles. It was a project to understand the nature of consciousness and dreams. The scientists involved claimed that, under extreme conditions, subjects could make contact with entities within their dreams, beings that lived within the dream world itself. The further Marcus digs, the more horrifying the details become. According to the limited records he can find, these entities were never mere creations of the subconscious. They were ancient, parasitic things, feeding off the human psyche, entering the minds of those who dared to venture too deep. The reports suggest that all participants in the experiment were driven to madness, some disappearing altogether, never to be seen again. But the most chilling part is the one detail that Marcus cannot ignore, a description of the figure seen by one of the last surviving participants. The witness, now institutionalized, described a featureless entity with elongated limbs, always watching, always waiting, with a grotesque, torn smile. It's the same figure that Marcus saw in his dream. The pieces begin to fall into place, and the horror of what Marcus has unleashed starts to settle in. The dream machine, in its ambition to project dreams, has done something far worse. It has opened a doorway, a gateway between the dream world and reality. And now, something has come through. The cold reality of it hits Marcus like a punch to the gut. This isn't just a malfunction of the machine. It's not something that can be fixed with a few adjustments. He has invited something into his world, and it's feeding off him. It's getting stronger. Determined to find a way to stop it, Marcus begins noticing connections between his dreams and events in the real world. The figure seems to leave traces, subtle disturbances. His phone rings in the middle of the night, but when he picks it up, there's nothing but static, except for the faintest whisper, his name, repeated over and over. Objects in his lab are moved when he returns after a short break. The monitors flicker to life on their own, displaying static that twists and warps into shapes Marcus can't bear to look at for too long. Each new disturbance tightens the grip of terror around his heart. Marcus's health begins to deteriorate rapidly. He hasn't slept properly in days, terrified of what might happen if he closes his eyes. But the more he tries to stay awake, the more the lines between the dream and reality blur. He starts seeing the figure during the day, at the edge of his vision, reflected in mirrors, staring back at him from the darkened corners of his lab. It's always there, lurking, waiting for him to fall asleep. One night, after hours of research, Marcus stumbles upon a journal entry from the Soviet experiment that makes his blood run cold. The lead scientist wrote that the only way to sever the connection was to confront the entity directly, within the dream, and find out what it wants. But those who attempted this confrontation never returned. They simply vanished. Marcus is now faced with an impossible choice. He can destroy the dream machine, severing any chance of understanding or controlling what he has unleashed, or he can attempt the dangerous confrontation, stepping back into the dream to face the entity. But every moment he hesitates, he can feel the entity growing stronger. It's no longer content with haunting his dreams. It wants more. It wants him. Marcus knows there's no turning back. The entity is tightening its grip on him, pushing him to the edge of sanity. Every moment awake is a battle to keep his mind intact, and every fleeting second of sleep is filled with twisted nightmares where the figure looms closer and closer. The boundaries between reality and the dream world have blurred beyond recognition. He's no longer sure which world he's in, his own or the entity's. Desperation consumes him as he comes to a terrifying conclusion. The only way to end this nightmare is to confront the entity on its own terms in the dream. But Marcus can't do it alone. Realizing he needs help, he reaches out to an old colleague, Dr. Eleanor Klein, a psychologist who once dabbled in fringe theories about dreams and consciousness. She's the only person he trusts with the truth, though he dreads how insane it sounds. When he calls her, his voice is strained, hoarse from lack of sleep and fear. "I've done something terrible, Eleanor. I opened a door, and something came through." The silence on the other end of the line is heavy before she finally responds, her tone cautious, but with a hint of belief. What exactly did you bring through, Marcus? He explains everything. The machine, the entity, the nightmares that are now bleeding into his waking life. He can hear the skepticism in her voice, but she agrees to meet him, if only to see how far he's fallen into madness. When Eleanor arrives at the lab, the sight of Marcus shocks her. He's gone pale, with dark circles under his eyes, like a man on the verge of collapse. The lab itself feels wrong to her, as though the air inside it is denser, heavier, carrying an oppressive energy. You have to see for yourself, Marcus insists, leading her to the dormant dream machine. He recounts the events in agonizing detail, how the machine was meant to project dreams, but instead opened a gateway. Eleanor listens, her expression a mix of disbelief and deep concern. But then, something happens. As Marcus begins explaining the presence of the entity, the lights in the lab flicker violently, casting the room in a sickly, pulsating glow. Eleanor freezes, her eyes widening as she feels it too, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. The hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. "Do you feel that?" she whispers, her voice trembling. Marcus nods grimly. "It's here. It's always here." Eleanor reluctantly agrees to help Marcus confront the entity, though fear grips her as tightly as it does him. Together, they devise a plan to force Marcus back into the dream world, this time with full awareness of what he's about to face. But as the time approaches to activate the machine again, Marcus can feel the weight of the decision crushing him. His heart pounds as Eleanor sets the electrodes on his temples. The room feels colder, darker, as though the entity is already aware of what they're planning. "Are you sure about this?" Eleanor asks, her voice shaking. Marcus doesn't answer. He can't. His mind is too focused on the looming terror of what awaits him on the other side. As the machine whirs to life, Marcus takes a deep breath and closes his eyes. The familiar sensation of falling into the dream world hits him, but this time, it's different. There's no slow descent, no gradual transition into unconsciousness. It's immediate, violent, like being yanked through a door he can't control. The world around him shifts into a dark, twisted version of his own reality. He's back in the same street from his childhood, but now everything is decayed, rotting. The trees are dead, their branches twisted like claws reaching toward the sky. The sky itself is an unnatural shade of black, as if the very fabric of the dream is unraveling. He hears it before he sees it. The raspy breathing, the soft whispering. "You came back." The voice echoes from everywhere and nowhere, wrapping around him like a suffocating blanket. Marcus feels the terror rising in his chest, but he pushes forward, knowing he has to confront the entity if he ever wants to be free. His legs feel heavy, like they're sinking into the ground, but he forces himself to move, step by agonizing step, toward the dark figure standing in the distance. It waits for him, its form barely distinguishable from the shadows around it. As Marcus approaches, the figure grows clearer, more solid, and he can see its grotesque face again. The blank, smooth skin, and the mouth that splits open like a tear in reality itself. But this time, there's something different. The entity is smiling. "You think you can end this?" it hisses, its voice low and mocking. "You think you have control?" Marcus stops a few feet away, his body trembling. He can feel its power, its presence overwhelming him, but he forces himself to speak. "What do you want from me?" he demands, though his voice barely holds steady. The figure doesn't move, but its smile widens, a grotesque, impossible grin that stretches too far across its face. "I want what you gave me," it whispers. A way out. Marcus's heart drops as the realization dawns on him. The entity doesn't want to stay in the dream world. It wants to cross fully into reality, to escape the confines of the dream and exist in the waking world. And Marcus is the key. He opened the door, and now it's his responsibility to close it, if he can. Suddenly, the figure lunges at him, its shadowy limbs stretching impossibly far, wrapping around Marcus's body, pulling him deeper into the darkness. He struggles, fighting with everything he has, but the entity's grip is too strong. "You'll never escape me," it hisses. "You belong to me now." The cold, suffocating grip of the entity tightens around Marcus, dragging him deeper into the darkness of the dream world. His mind races, desperately searching for a way out, but the entity's presence is overwhelming, a constant, suffocating pressure that makes it hard to think, let alone escape. Marcus can feel his consciousness slipping, the lines between dream and reality fracturing beyond repair. The shadows that coil around him pulse with malevolent intent, as if feeding on his fear, drawing him further into its domain. "You can't win." The entity's voice slithers through the air, a haunting, disembodied whisper that echoes in Marcus's mind. Its face is no longer a distant silhouette. It's close, impossibly close. Its blank, smooth skin inches from his. The jagged mouth, a gaping wound in the fabric of the dream, curls into a sickening grin as it speaks again. "This is my world. You brought me here, and now you will stay." For a brief moment, Marcus is consumed by despair. He can feel the entity's influence burrowing deeper into his mind, unraveling his sense of self, blurring the lines of his identity. It's as if the more he fights, the more he loses himself. His thoughts become fragmented, incoherent whispers in his own head. But then, through the haze of fear and confusion, he remembers something Eleanor had said before they activated the machine. "Dreams are creations of the mind, Marcus. They only have as much power as you give them." The words spark a flicker of hope, a reminder that, no matter how real it feels, this world is still a dream. Summoning every ounce of willpower, Marcus pushes back against the darkness. The shadows claw at him, trying to pull him deeper, but he fights against them with a newfound determination. The entity recoils slightly, as if sensing his resolve. "You don't control me," Marcus gasps, his voice hoarse but filled with defiance. "This is my mind, my dream." The entity hisses in response, its grin faltering for the first time. Marcus seizes the moment. He knows that if he can assert control over the dream, he might have a chance to break free. In the distance, Marcus can see a faint light, a flicker of the real world, the waking world. He focuses on it, willing himself toward it. The shadows around him writhe and twist, but they start to lose their grip as Marcus pushes through them. The entity, now furious, lunges at him, its grotesque form distorting in the shifting darkness. "You cannot escape," it roars, its voice echoing with rage. But Marcus doesn't stop. He forces his mind to focus on the light, on reality, on everything that makes him who he is. The light grows brighter, and the dream begins to dissolve around him, the oppressive weight of the entity's presence fading. Marcus can feel his body waking up, the sensation of the lab coming back to him. He's almost there, almost free. But just as he's about to break through, the entity makes one final, desperate attempt to hold him. Its voice cuts through the dream like a blade, cold and menacing. "You can never truly escape me, Marcus. I'll be waiting. Always." With a final surge of effort, Marcus breaks free from the dream, gasping for air as his eyes fly open. He's back in the lab, the cold, sterile reality of the room grounding him. The machine is silent, the humming that once haunted the room now gone. Eleanor rushes to his side, her face pale with concern. "Marcus, are you okay?" she asks, her voice filled with both fear and relief. He nods, though his body trembles with the aftershock of what he's just experienced. For a moment, Marcus allows himself to believe it's over. The dream is behind him, the entity trapped where it belongs. But then, as his eyes adjust to the dim light of the lab, he notices something. The shadows in the corners of the room seem deeper than before, darker, like they're alive, watching. He blinks, shaking his head, telling himself it's just his mind playing tricks. But a feeling of being watched lingers. Suddenly, the lights flicker. A chill runs down Marcus's spine, and his heart pounds in his chest. He looks at the monitor of the dream machine, now powered off. But for a brief moment, the screen flashes static. And there, in the static, he sees it. A familiar silhouette, standing in the darkness, watching him. The entity's voice echoes in his mind one last time. I told you, Marcus. I'll always be here. In your dreams. In your reality. You open the door. And now. You will never close it. The video fades to black, leaving the audience with unanswered questions and a lingering sense of dread. Did Marcus truly escape? Or has the entity found a way into the real world, forever lurking in the shadows of his life? The story remains open-ended, the mystery unsolved, leaving the viewers to grapple with the terrifying possibility that the line between dreams and reality has been irreparably blurred. Do you think you could face your own nightmares if they became real? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for more stories that will keep you up at night. And remember, some doors, once open, can never be closed. The screen fades to black, but the sense of dread lingers, hanging in the air like a thick fog that refuses to lift. As Marcus sits in the dimly lit lab, his mind reeling from the ordeal, the weight of what he's unleashed presses down on him. He's back in reality, or at least he thinks he is. But the more he looks around, the more uneasy he becomes. Every shadow feels alive. Every creak of the old building sounds like something moving just out of sight. He tries to convince himself that it's over, that the entity is locked away in the dream world, but deep down, he knows better. Marcus stands and walks toward the monitor of the dream machine, his eyes drawn to the dark, reflective surface of the screen. For a moment, he catches his reflection staring back at him, pale, haunted, broken. But then, just at the edge of his vision, he sees it. A flicker, a flash of something wrong. The reflection shifts, warping for a split second into something else. Something darker, something with a grotesque, torn smile. His heart skips a beat, and he stumbles back, shaking his head, trying to clear his mind. It's just my imagination, he mutters, though his voice trembles. It's over. It has to be. But as Marcus tries to return to his life, things only get stranger. Objects in his lab continue to move on their own, small at first. Books shifting slightly on the shelves, papers rustling as if touched by an invisible hand. The whispers, once faint and easy to dismiss, grow louder, more persistent. He hears his name being called, always from just around the corner, always from somewhere he can't quite reach. The figure in his dreams hasn't gone. It's here, watching, waiting. One night, while sitting alone in the lab, Marcus hears a knock on the door. A slow, deliberate knock that echoes through the silent halls. His heart races as he gets up to check, but when he opens the door, there's no one there. Only the empty hallway, stretching out in both directions. But as he turns to close the door, he catches a glimpse of something, just for a split second, standing at the far end of the hall. It's the figure, featureless and silent, watching him. His blood runs cold. He slams the door shut and locks it, but the sense of being watched doesn't go away. It's always there, just out of sight. As the days blur into nights, Marcus becomes consumed by paranoia. Every time he closes his eyes, he feels the entity creeping closer, as if it's only waiting for the right moment to strike. He's terrified to sleep, afraid that if he does, he'll never wake up again. The lines between reality and dreams have become so thin that he no longer knows where one ends and the other begins. He begins seeing the figure in his waking life more frequently, reflected in windows, standing in the shadows of doorways, even in the faces of strangers on the street. The entity is always there, taunting him with its silent presence. In a final, desperate attempt to rid himself of the entity, Marcus considers destroying the dream machine. He believes that if he can obliterate the device, he might be able to sever the connection once and for all. But as he moves to dismantle the machine, his hands tremble. There's a part of him, deep down, that fears it won't be enough. What if the entity no longer needs a machine to enter his world? What if it's already too late? The thought freezes him in place, paralyzing him with terror. The figure's voice echoes in his mind, soft and mocking. You can't escape me, Marcus. I'm everywhere now. The screen fades back in to show Marcus sitting in his darkened lab, staring at the machine, a broken man. His face is gaunt, his eyes hollow, haunted by sleepless nights and a relentless pursuit of the entity. The camera zooms in on his face, capturing the raw fear etched into his features. His hand hovers over the switch of the machine, torn between destroying it or leaving it be. His breathing is shallow, his fingers trembling. Suddenly, the lights flicker again, and the temperature in the room drops sharply. Marcus's breath comes out in visible puffs of air. The shadows in the corners of the room shift, and the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoes behind him. Slowly, he turns, dread tightening in his chest. The camera doesn't show what he sees, but Marcus's expression says it all. Wide-eyed, frozen in terror. His lips part, but no sound escapes. Whatever is standing in the shadows is more than just a fragment of his nightmares. It's here. It's real. Has Marcus been consumed by the entity? Has he crossed over into the dream world permanently? Or is the entity now loose in reality, stalking him through the waking world? Not all dreams are meant to be seen, and some nightmares can never be escaped. The eerie silence that follows lingers for a moment before a soft, familiar whisper creeps in. I'm still here. What do you think happened to Marcus? Is the entity real, or was it all in his mind? Leave your theories in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that will make you question what's real and what's lurking in the shadows. And remember, sometimes when you close your eyes, something may be watching you from the darkness.